Stevens. You're joining us for Dave Stevens Speaks right here on River West Radio 104.1. And tonight, a very special Dave Stevens Speaks as we pay homage to legendary sports writer, just a jack of all trades and legendary man, writer, human being, father, Sid Hartman, who died this past Sunday at age 100. Hi, everybody. Dave Stevens here tonight. And, we are going to just have a little bit of fun. We're going to go down memory lane. Thank you for joining me on the Disability Channel and, of course, on River West Radio 104.1 and all of the Dave Stevens Speaks platform on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn now that we've added. And but let's get right to my guest tonight. And we've got a bunch of people joining me tonight. Right now, I've got a couple of Erics, two of my old friends from my days in Minnesota, Eric Giselson and Eric Nelson, who work closely with Sid Hartman. Both of these guys have some great stories. And so Eric Nelson and Eric Giselson, thanks for joining me tonight to talk a little bit about Sid Hartman.
Thanks for having us, Dave. And Eric Nelson, good to see you again, my friend.
Yes, Eric G. Once upon a time, there were three Erics doing sports in the Twin Cities, Eric Perkins being the other one. They got us confused a lot.
The Amigos, the Amigos.
The Amigos. So good to see you and Dave, and thanks for the invite, Dave.
And we got some other people going to join us a little bit later. Wally Langfellow, Patrick Royce is supposed to join us, Joe Schmidt, Rob Lear. So, again, we're just going to kind of reminisce about Sid. And I'm going to go with the elder statesman on this one, Eric Nelson. Let me talk to Eric Giselson because, Eric, as a kid growing up in Duluth and kind of growing up in the Twin Cities, you got to see Sid from the early days when he was this beat writer, and then suddenly you got to work with him. I mean, what was that whole transformation like growing up, watching him, and then being around him?
Well, it's funny, since Sid's passing, a lot of people have called or texted or emailed or just phoned. And I think one of the things, as a native-born Minnesotan, which I am at 60 years old now, hard to believe, my earliest memories of Sid were likely either in a fishing boat or in a field pheasant hunting with my dad's generation. And my dad's 92 years old now. And Davey, my situation was, who's this guy that my dad and all of his buddies, fishing and hunting buddies, and you have to understand, my dad was a staunch sports, he was an athlete and he was a sports guy. And like many Minnesotans, I could be in a boat and we would have to go in so we could listen to, go for football or anything Vikings or anything Twins. And it wasn't as much to listen to the game itself, but to see what Sid Hartman was saying about it. And during the same time, you would be like, what was Sid writing about it? And what is Sid saying about it? So as a curious young man growing up, just kind of at the feet of my father and his generation, it was like, who's this Sid Hartman guy? And then you grow up and find out that, he was basically Mr. Sports in the Twin Cities and Minnesota and the upper Midwest. And you came to find out that people cared about his opinion and people argued about his decision and people had table fare about his decision, about his opinion. And it just kind of took on this world of its own. And long story short, I progressed as, going to high school and college and then going into the media field. So I knew Sid Hartman from my dad's generation. And then, alongside of him, like Eric Nelson here in the trenches and other of your guests tonight on Dave Stevens Speaks of, working alongside of him. And those are tales from another story. So it's been interesting to separate my professional career of almost 20 years here in Minnesota in mainstream sports media to the Sid Hartman I grew up in with alongside my dad, and much different people, as we'll get into on your show here, hopefully, if you call my name, because he was an icon. If you grew up here and lived here, Sid Hartman was the guy, and people rotated their weekends around him or weekday sporting events. And what transpired later was kind of an epiphany for me to see, the guy that I grew up listening to, and then the guy I ended up working around. And I'm not sure he did a great job of answering your question, but two different planes, that's for sure.
And Eric, I mean, you were around him, you know, day in and day out, Vikings. I mean, what was it like to be around this crotchety kind of codger yet lovable? And I mean, what was that uniqueness that the athletes saw that I guess we didn't always see?
Yeah, well, I think first and foremost for me, being a guy from Southern California, when I first got up here, you knew of Sid. And when I worked in Iowa, I remember Hayden Fry bringing him up at a news conference once before a Hawkeyes Gophers game down in Iowa City. So he had this persona, this cachet about him. But I remember reading his column initially and thinking, okay, what's the big deal? It's just a bunch of notes and jottings. It's very provincial. I was used to reading people like Jim Murray with the LA Times and Scott Osler out on the West Coast, where they were more creative in their writing. It wasn't the information that you got from Sid. But the longer I've been up here, the more I appreciate what his column is all about, and that is getting out information. And the way he pounds the beat, because as Eric G knows, I've been at a lot of events. I enjoy going. I still love going to the games, at least pre-pandemic. And there's Sid. You'd see him at batting practice before the Twins game, at the Metrodome or Target Field. You'd be at Winter Park at Eden Prairie or out in Eagan at the new TCO Performance Center. There's Sid. Timberwolves have a shoot-around, for goodness sakes, in the morning. There he is, trying to interview either the coach of the Timberwolves or maybe the visiting coach in town for whoever they're playing, Portland or the New York Knicks or whoever it might be. So I grew to appreciate his work ethic and his passion for sports. And I think anybody who's been around him, he can be intimidating. When I first got up here, he started, yelling at me and wondering who the heck am I and why am I saying what I'm saying on the radio and what pedigree do I have? And then Dark Star once told me that I worked with Dark at CCO Radio. He says, if Sid yells at you, if he undresses you, then he likes you. And I think we all came to realize that. And for the young reporters, it was, you're like, wow, this old guy, this Sid Hartman guy doesn't like me. Well, he likes people that shows up, and cover events. So I think for me, that was the takeaway I got early is that he was always somewhere, and sports was a huge deal for him.
Eric, was there ever a moment, I don't know, towards the end or that kind of acknowledgement or appreciation that you were at least an equal or at least, could get at the big person's table at Thanksgiving in the sports world? Was there ever that moment you guys ever shared, like, hey, good job, kid, or you scooped him or anything?
Eric G or Eric N?
Eric Nelson.
I will say this. He gave me some compliments over the years, and they mean a lot. I remember being at Super Bowl 32 in San Diego, and the week before I went out, Paul Krause was on Mark Rosen's show on Channel 4, and I was in the station then, and I said, Paul, hey, I'm going to be in San Diego. I hope you get the Hall of Fame call this year, because as you guys know, Paul Krause waited forever and a day to get into the Hall of Fame. And he says, well, I'll be at the Town and Country Hotel in San Diego. Call me when I get in. We tried to be positive about it. And I remember going to the news conference for the Hall of Fame on Super Bowl Saturday, and I'm standing there, and I was next to Larry Fitzgerald, a guy that you both know. And I said, if Paul Krause gets in, I have his phone number, and I'm going to call him. And sure enough, Paul Tagliabue, and this is before they had it on NFL Honors and all the stuff. Now, this was pretty grassroots. Paul Tagliabue stands up, opens an envelope, and says, Paul Krause is in the Hall of Fame. And I had to run to a bank of payphones at the San Diego Hyatt. I called Paul Krause at the Town and Country. He didn't even know. He was shocked. He says, I'm in? I said, yeah, you're in. So long story short, I took the rental car and drove to the hotel. And then I had to get into CNN, which was shooting stuff for CCO TV on the other side of San Diego by SeaWorld. And I'm all nervous. I don't want to get in an accident. His wife's there. His daughter's there. So I was the first guy basically to tell Paul Krause he was in the Hall of Fame. And the next day I made Sid's column. And he said, yeah, Eric Nelson broke that story. And that's when I said, oh, okay. He noticed. He probably was upset. But he gave me some props, and I was thankful.
Eric Giselson, when you had to go into a locker room in Minnesota for Twins to get Puckett, Herbeck, was it always kind of disappointing when you saw Sid cowered in that corner because you knew that he was going to, one, keep him for 30 minutes, and two, by the time he was done, you weren't going to get anything?
Yes and no. And to Eric's point, and to Sid's work ethic, the one thing you can't deny about it is that he hustled and he worked. And I think, even Eric Nelson would admit to this as a young sports journalist breaking into the field. You think it's all glitz and glamour, and then you go like, you know what though? You got to hustle and you got to work. And even if you don't feel like checking in on a beat, or if you don't feel like being there or be present, I think we all took a page from Sid's work ethic. But to your point, Dave, Sid was, I actually think Sid just believed he was the deal. And by the way, as the decades stacked up, who wouldn't think that they were the deal? So if he had people commandeered and you were a little gun shy about jumping in or worried about maybe content being burned up, you just had to finally go ahead and do it. And I wasn't as worried about Sid's reaction to us finally getting the star of the game, whether it be in a football, locker room or clubhouse of baseball or dressing room of hockey or anything else in between. It was basically that Sid would usually hang around and stay in your shot. And, Sid was a print journalist and usually was only concerned with what he was getting for quotes, either to be used on radio and there would be this giant kind of like territory deal. And I actually will go to my grave saying that Sid Hartman took more slashes from opposing television media, reporters and photographers than any NHLer ever did, because Sid loved to hold his microphone straight up in the middle of your subject's face just to let everybody know that Sid Hartman was there. And it was a constant, like, get that mic out of my shot. And there's some legendary, basically screaming matches of the visual media, which was television, and Sid still being in and around or barging into an interview situation. And Eric, I know you can speak of this from your days at WCCO television too. It was, there was some 10-minute slashing penalties in those scrums, weren't there?
Yeah, he was, this is my turf and how dare you come onto it and try to get the same interview I want. And if you got there before he did, and, in my radio days, you do a little bit longer interviews than you would on television typically. If you made him wait, he would just have this glare looking at you like, well, how can you do this to me? You're not as important as I am. And then towards as he got older, I remember at Winter Park in Eden Prairie, where the Vikings used to practice, a lot of times he'd come out and he'd do the interview, and then he'd turn around and say to me or Wally or somebody like Eric, well, who was that? He would get the sound, and then we would tell him who the player was, and that was part of the the beauty of Sid. But he was a guy that the longer I was around him, I realized this is what he's all about. And one of my favorite stories is when I got up here, and this again, pre-internet, and so much different in the way you prep for radio or TV. But every day I bought the Star Tribune, the Pioneer Press, USA Today, and you could get the Chicago Tribune in the Twin Cities, same day edition. So I would buy that, read it, and try to get information. Well, Sid, I once found out because I went to his house on the St. Croix for Thanksgiving. He did invite me, and I thank him for that, Chad as well. But he had all these newspapers he subscribed to from around the nation, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune. That's where he liked to get jottings and information, but they would come 3 or 4 days late. So I'm sitting at the Metrodome one day before a Twins game reading the same day Chicago Tribune, and he looks at me, he says, "Where'd you get that?" I said, "Sid, you can get it out on the street. It's available in the newspaper rack." He had no idea. He was still getting it mailed to him 3 or 4 days later, and I think he was very happy to find out he could just go get it the same day.
Eric Giselson, what do you think? What was his appeal to the players? Because there's not going to be like those kind of relationships anymore where athletes trust the beat writers. So how did Sid develop that, especially given his advanced age over the young players. You saw some maturity develop with Randy Moss and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's funny you could say this, and I know Eric Nelson can attest to this, but, my memories, hey, all of us in the media saw players come and go way more often than people in the media. I mean, Sid was the Norm Peterson of Cheers. I mean, he came and he stayed. He stayed at Cheers. But if you think about, teenagers, basically, guys like Randy Moss or Chris Carter or, Kent Herbeck had an advantage because he was from Minnesota. But people who would come in and play for a franchise or play college football or college sports, Randy Moss and Mike McDonald, who was playing for the North Stars as a rookie, we would watch these young kids go like their day one would be, who in the hell is this guy? And by the end of their careers, it was usually hugs and let's hang out together. I mean, Sid was a man for the people. He was a man from Minnesota, and the smart ones figured that out. And whether it was, I think most of it was sincere by the end. Some of it in the early years was, you got to play Sid Hartman's game. You better be good to him. Otherwise, he's going to bury you. But by and large, and even after his passing now, seeing some of the pictures and seeing some of the words spoken, guys like Randy Moss, who weren't exactly media darlings early in their careers, genuinely loved Sid Hartman. And by the end, usually gave Mr. Hartman very preferential treatment, which for a lot of us was like, wait a minute, what's that? But it happened and it was real. And Sid became a man for the people and sports fans of Minnesota. But as much, I think, in my opinion, as a man for the athletes of Minnesota. And I don't think there's many exceptions, Eric Nelson.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. A lot of people in the media, especially columnists, they're paid to have an opinion, and they generate controversial, statements and issues. And Sid was just the opposite. He wanted the Twins to win. He wanted the Gophers to win, the Vikings. So he's cheering for these teams. While most of us have been trained to stay neutral. Hey, what's the first thing you learn in a press box? You can't cheer. Well, Sid didn't adhere to that rule. It was frequent that Sid would cheer or he would yell. I mean, he would scream. I've heard a lot of stories, and I watched this game from afar in California as a young kid. But the Drew Pearson game, when he pushed off on Nate Wright in '75, the Hail Mary and the whiskey bottle comes out of the stands at the old Met and it hits the I think his name was Armin Terzian. I've been told, now I don't know if this is a fact, but I do believe it, that after the game, Terzian's laying in the Met Stadium training room getting treatment from doctors. He's been hit by a whiskey bottle. And Sid opens the door and says, "You cost us the game." He was just livid that he made that call. And Vikings that I know, and a lot of them I've gotten to know very well, the Chuck Forms and people like that, have told me that '75 team was the best team they had. And, of course, they got out by that push by Drew.
Well, I'm going to stop you there for a second, Eric, and I think we have the legendary Patrick Royce. Patrick, can you hear me? Can you see me? Can you get us? All right, we've got Patrick Royce with us, so thank you for joining us, Pat. It's great to have you here with Eric Giselson, Eric Nelson, as we kind of stroll down and grab you for a few minutes. I know you've been talking about Sid, and it's got to be very emotional for you this week. It's very tough to work with somebody and now have to talk about it. So thank you for joining us, and I just want to get your thoughts. I mean, I thought this guy would live forever,
Well, I think that was my first tweet, gentlemen. He's the first guy to die at 100 years old. We were all surprised. It was a shocker on Sunday morning, and I talked to Chad, actually, his son, on Thursday night. He said he wasn't doing great, but he snapped back so many times that nobody expected it. I think on Thursday he actually wrote his last column and it appeared in Sunday's paper. And as Eric was just pointing out to you, it was a very positive look at how things were going to go for the Twins. Adam Thielen was telling us the ship was going to be righted shortly. Didn't quite work out that way. No truth to the rumor that Sid watched the first half, though, and then expired. That's not true. He was in bad shape before he watched that Viking game.
So will it shock you, though, if there's a couple more columns that he's going to send posthumously about turning some things around?
Well, he actually wrote one in the paper today, to be honest. Although I think that he wrote it in the paper today. In fact, I tried to write a Sid column in the paper today, and then I found myself at the grocery store, and I was in a line, and there was the woman who was doing the checkout, and the woman in front of her that she was checking out for. They were having a conversation and they weren't leaving. And I found myself swearing under my breath. And I thought, my God, I have turned into Sid. Except Sid wouldn't have done it under his breath. He would have just told him to get moving. But as all these guys can tell you, Giz, he's probably got pushed out of the way a couple of times with his TV camera. And Eric, patience was not the man's number one virtue.
Patrick, what was the appeal to him? What was like, why did the players love him and give them their phone numbers and do all these things that most athletes wouldn't do in this day and age? Well,
because they knew if he wrote about them, they were going to be the greatest human beings that ever walked planet Earth. That had a lot to do with it. But, he was willing to trade, I guess, the fact that they all gave him a hard time when he walked in the locker room. And, Randy Moss is emotional about Sid's death, and they got along great. Sid says, every time I heard Randy Moss address Sid, it was with a slur of some kind. But apparently that was Sid's way to get in with Randy Moss. And everything with Sid was tactical, though. He was doing these things he was doing this to get himself access was what he was after, and he got himself access. He didn't. I was trying to figure out what him and Bud had in common, and I think it was that they didn't do anything spontaneously. There was always a motive. I mean, yelling at the officials, he obviously did that spontaneously. But as far as his actions were concerned, there was a madness behind everything he did, I believe.
Well, let me bring in Joe Schmidt. Do you hear me? Do you got us, Joe?
Yes, you have me.
All right, I've got you. We've got Patrick Royce, Eric Giselson, Eric Nelson on Dave Stevens Speaks, and thank you guys so much. We're just kind of reminiscing as Royce's just joined in and telling us that still putting out columns, so we got those to look forward to. But Joe, while we have Pat for a little bit, I know you guys have been on Sunday Sports Wrap over the years together, but what are some of you battled in the trenches with Sid over the years? I mean, it's got to be melancholy to lose such an icon, yet you guys went at it some good times.
Well, originally I see Eric Giselson on the call, and I thought Rob Lear was going to be on the call, and I don't know if Royce remembers this one or not, but Tommy Kramer in the Vikings locker room after a game, Tommy and Sid are trying to interview, Rob and Sid are trying to interview Tommy Kramer. Now, when Sid started an interview, for whatever reason, he thought that everybody else had to shut up until he was done with his interview because he wanted to use it on the radio. Well, Lear wasn't going to let him dominate the interview. The next thing I know, they got in a sword fight with their microphones right in front of Kramer. Kramer all of a sudden just said, "Jesus Christ," and he walks away. But it was one of the great moments of broadcast history. And the funny thing is, I think about moments like that, and today we would have used that on the air. Back then we didn't. And Royce, you got to remember the time he challenged Jack McCloskey to a fight when he wanted the Timberwolves to draft Calbert Cheney, and they drafted J.R. Ryder.
Yeah, that was a great night. He was convinced that they were going to take Bobby's guy Cheney because Bobby wanted Cheney to get drafted high, and they took J.R. Ryder. And then, of course, JR missed his flight and was 8 hours late. And Sid basically said, "How could you draft this bum instead of Cheney?" Why Ryder was sitting there. Yeah, that was one of my two favorite press conferences with Sid. The other one was when he was mad that they hired Denny Green instead of Pete Carroll, and he and Hedrick started screaming at each other with Denny sitting up there. That was fun too.
Yeah, that was always good.
Joe, as we've talked a little bit earlier, we talked about the legend, the mystique of Sid, but the one thing we always thought was, he's always joking. He's close personal friends with this and that, and Bobby Knight and, George Steinbrenner. But lo and behold, he really was close personal friends with so many, as Troy Aikman alluded to in the football game on Sunday night.
Well, back in the Rolodex days, which will age us, but back in the Rolodex days, everybody always thought that Sid's Rolodex had to be the most valuable thing in town because he did have everybody's number. And if he didn't have the number, he'd call somebody who he knew had the number, and he would make them give you the number. He was pretty persistent.
Well, speaking of Rob Lear, he has now joined us. So we've got Ricey.
Oh, here he is. Sid's number one opponent.
Rob Lear. I feel like this is cool. So Rob Lear joining us tonight, and Rob, thank you. Your thoughts that Sid is gone.
Well, I'm joining you guys tonight from Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm down here visiting my youngest son. We're at dinners at St. Elmo's. I walk in, and there's a picture of Sid, I swear to God, on the wall with Tom Moore when he coached with the Indianapolis Colts. So, I mean, he's all over and will continue to be all over the place.
Well, we were talking earlier, Rob, some of your great confrontations with Tommy Kramer. I mean, why did you guys always – it seemed like you two really, really got into some heated ones. I witnessed some big FU sessions in the press box and, at the Met Center.
Well, I just think it was Sid's combative nature. And, we all were competing. And what I just never understood about Sid, God rest his soul, was that, most of what he was doing post-game in a locker room was for WCCO radio, 2 days later. We were on tight deadlines trying to put it on the 10 o'clock news at a 10-minute turn time. And he never wanted to respect anybody's deadline. He just wanted, as Joe was talking earlier, he just wanted to take the whole room over. And so, yeah, I used to step on his toes a little bit, but, I've always liked a good argument, and Sid would give you one.
Well, that was one thing. Sid could never step on my toes, but just to witness the things that I saw growing up, and to just you watch this man held with such a high esteem, and yet he started with the Lakers in the 50s as a GM and just continued to stay in this process and stay on TV at age 100 when we can't even get out of bed at age 60. So I just was wondering, Joe and Pat Ricey, what your thoughts were. Was he still putting out the same kind of quality late in life?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that was always amazing, the one story I told the people was we were getting off the elevator at the Vikings game, 2019 season. So Sid's still there. He's got a walker. He's got a nurse with him all the time. And at the new Viking Stadium, you've got about a 100-yard walk from the media elevator to the Vikings locker room. We get off the elevator with Sid, and all of a sudden I'm walking with Bob Sansevier. And all of a sudden I said to Bob, Bob, we got to hurry up. We can't keep up to Sid. We couldn't keep up to Sid with his walker at 99 years old.
Hey, Joe, if he knew what a good weapon that walker was to get into the locker room and knock everybody out of the way, he would have started using it years earlier. He was, the first 2 years he had it, he basically carried it. Then he needed it after a while. He is the fastest walker in the history of mankind. It was amazing.
Well, it was neat to see, the stadiums accommodate him and help him later in life to get those access.
Later in life, they accommodated him since the time he was 50.
Hey, he was old when I met him in 1983. So,
hey, Dave.
Yeah.
Dave. I see Gis on the phone. Gis there. Why don't you ask about the shoulder rubs that he used to give Gis?
We'll save that for the next hour. You guys hold on real tight if you can stay with me a few more minutes. I've got to wrap as we drop off one, but stay on the other. Stay with us for a little bit. You guys have been great. Thank you, Joe, Eric, Patrick, and Rob. So hang tight with us as we go into the second hour of Dave Stevens Speaks. Don't forget to follow Dave Stevens Speaks on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and, of course, the Disability Channel and 101.1 WXRW on River West Radio. Follow me next week. Next Thursday, Drew Bledsoe is my guest. So continue to support Dave Stevens Speaks on all of our platforms. Great show tonight about Sid Hartman. We're going to continue. So you drop off. Stay with us. We'll continue in just a moment. All right, we're back for the second half of Dave Stevens right here on River West Radio and the Disability Channel and all of the other cross platforms. You guys are getting sick of me, but I've got so many great friends with me tonight. And again, thank you guys for joining me and being a part of this. And we're expecting Wally Langfellow, hopefully just a little bit. Wally's out campaigning, and he's running for mayor of, let's see, I forget where it is here. Robbinsdale. Wally is running for the mayor of Robbinsdale. So we'll have him in a little bit. But Patrick, to get back to your point, as we were talking a little bit earlier, as far as, his writing style late in life, I mean, did it change? Did he become less crass, or did he focus more on, breaking down and still trying to find the X's and O's behind the scenes?
Oh, the last number of years, he went more for the taped interviews and the long stuff. I mean, back in the days when he was at the top of his game, 60s, 70s, 80s, it was more notesy. There was not the long interview things. But his sentences were a little more coherent in the last couple of years because Jeff Day was writing them for him and he was telling him what to put in there. But the art of actually writing, I think Jeff was doing most of it, became his right-hand man. Now, he worked right beside him, told him what he wanted. But there was a column about 2 weeks ago, about a month ago, that I said to Jeff, you got to tone it down a little bit. This isn't Sid, man. You got too many coherent. The transitions are all good. We don't have all the rambling sentences. We got to get back to Sid style here.
Well, Joe and Rob Lear, did you guys learn anything from Sid over the years that you might have taken away or at least tried to avoid?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Rob.
Well, our local press and the front offices always tried to have all these rules and policies, and of course Sid had he didn't have to obey any of them. And so I mean I can just remember how many times I was in disagreement with front office and say, well, wait a minute, I mean, we're supposed to wait out here, or these interviews are only going to happen at this time. We can only shoot practice at this time. And Sid had complete reign of all these venues. And he had complete blessing of all these venues. So they just had a double standard for rules. And so I always remember that I was taking that up with Sid. And he would do is puff out his chest. I mean, the more we'd make about him, the more he would enjoy and relish in that moment.
How about you, Joe?
Well, I would just have to say kind of his persistence and even at the end, it's kind of amazing. You would think that you'd get to be in your 90s, you wouldn't care about a scoop. That's all he cared about, was trying to scoop people. And then when he broke his hip, everybody thought that'd be the end of him. And 3 weeks later, PJ Fleck is at the news conference. Patrick wrote it in one of his columns. By the way, Patrick, some amazing stuff you've been writing. Today's was off the charts. But 3 weeks later, he's at PJ Fleck's opening news conference, and right after the news conference, he's in his face saying, "I've got a show on Sunday morning on WCCO radio. You're going to be on every week." That was just Sid. He was competitive, as that never stopped, which I think was pretty amazing.
Patrick, you were with him the longest. I mean, did you guys ever have some real heated battles over a scoop or something you wanted to go with that may have hurt one of his athletes or anything like that?
He had more trouble with the beat writers than me because I didn't pay any attention to him because I was writing my own stuff. But once in a while, he would. You had to be careful to not let him know what you were writing because, like 2 days in advance, because he'd try to cut you off at the pass and get it in first. Actually, when Dan Barrero and I were the two columnists, if it wasn't, a deadline thing, they wanted us to submit our columns on Fridays for Sunday, and Sid would come in and get printouts of them on Saturday morning. And if we were putting out a message he didn't like, he'd be refuting it in the Sunday paper when nobody'd seen our stuff yet. But it was Sid had a tough job because not only was he trying to control his message, he was trying to control the message that the newspaper sent out. and the message that the entire media sent out, for that matter. He was he really wanted everybody to be on the bandwagon, I guess. Who could use Sid this week though? The Vikes, couldn't they, man? Sid, they could use. They're getting rid of the guy they just traded for today, and they could use Sid out there telling us why this is a good idea. They're missing him right now.
Well, Joe, I know you got to go and get ready for the later shows, but do you have a really good Sid story you could leave us with before you jump off?
Well, here's one thing I'll just say about Sid. 10 years ago, I had a little bout with cancer. So Sid's 90 years old, and I would see Sid. I mean, I'm not kidding. Up until the last year, almost every time he saw me, he asked me how my health is, and he was really concerned. I mean, it wasn't like just out of the blue thing. And he could be growly and he could be ornery, but he really had a soft heart. And I guess I always appreciated that about him because, he certainly didn't have to do that. But you also got a complex when you talk to Sid, because when he was talking to you, his eyes were never on you. They were always looking around for somebody else to talk to in case somebody else walked by important. And one last thing I want to say, I think this might be the greatest quote of all time. And Royce, you know many of them, because he had a lot of Yogi Berra-isms. And he was talking about Jim Finks, the old general manager of the Minnesota Vikings, who died of cancer. He said, well, he smoked like a fish, to which we think means that he must have drank like a chimney. But that was it.
Yeah, he was good. He was good with the malaprops.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I promise I'll re-cue the tapes when this airs, so it won't be, we won't have some of the old problems that we used to have. So.
All right. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Good to see everybody. Thanks much.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it. I know you got to go. That's Joe Schmidt. And Royce, I know you want to take off too, but do you have any closing thoughts that, as far as your relationship with Sid? And, I know it was very, embattled sometimes, but still a beautiful, relationship that you had for a long time.
Well, I'll say one thing about him. He was as goofy as we thought he was. He had the peripheral vision of an athlete. He could see everything that was going around. He couldn't hear for 20 years, but his observation skills of what was going on in the press box, what was going on in the locker room, he could walk into Winter Park and sense that something was going on. He had that great sense of I think he always was a suspicious guy, and he had a great sense of when he should have his antenna up. And, he'd go to a baseball game. He wouldn't watch the baseball game, but he'd watch everything else that was going on around it. He would know where the general manager was, where the team president was, where everything was. He was always on the lookout, and he had great ability to observe what was going on. His observation skills were really good. That's for sure.
Well, Patrick, I appreciate you. It was great seeing you in Florida. I hope you're in your good health, and hopefully, I hope you were around for 100 years. That'd be kind of cool if you were doing this thing, right?
I'll take 10 more good ones, and I'll be happy.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Thanks for joining us, and best of luck, and take care to you. Thank you so much, and we'll keep reading you. Keep pumping out the good work.
All right, thank you.
All right. Okay, that leaves us with Eric Nelson, Eric Giselson, and Rob Lear. So as we kind of get ready and wrap up some of these amazing memories, Eric Nelson, as you sit back, did any other things kind of pop into your brain as you were hearing Joe and Rob and Patrick?
Absolutely. I was there on a Saturday night at the Metrodome when the Gophers used to play their games, their football, and he and Larry Fitzgerald Sr. got into it. And Larry had written something and said something that Sid didn't like. And Sid came up and basically just got right in Larry's grill and attacked him in the back of the box. And you guys all remember the Metrodome press box. And they were shouting at each other. Nobody was watching the game. Of course, the Gophers really weren't worth watching back then anyway. But all the attention shifted to these two guys, in a heated argument. And Larry had a cup of water in his hand, ice water, and he tossed it in Sid's face. And we were like, wow. And so Mark Ryan, who was the SID then for the Gophers, immediately wanted to get Larry out of the box. And I said, Mark, you got to do what you got to do. But I will say Sid started it. Sid got in his face pronto. So Mark was able to calm things down, get Larry to his seat, get Sid to his seat. So about 2 months later, I'm in San Diego Super Bowl. There's a pregame brunch before the game. It was Packers and Broncos. And I was going to sit down next to Larry in this brunch. All of a sudden, here comes Sid. And Larry was off getting food. Sid's next to me, and I said, Sid, good to see you. Happy Super Sunday, but I got to warn you, Larry Fitzgerald's right next to me. He said, I don't care. And Larry comes up, and they wind up having a great conversation. And Larry actually reached for his ice water, and Sid didn't even flinch, and Larry drank it. So that one that I have, and another I guess that comes to mind is a few years ago, Sid came out with a couple CDs, like the best of Sid, that I worked on the project. I did the voiceover work, but I had to listen to all these cassette tapes. He had boxes of them, right? And I had to whittle it down to a couple hours. But what was fascinating was I heard a phone call once with Calvin Griffith, and this wasn't on the air. This was just the call to get the notes for the column. And to hear Sid talk to Calvin Griffith, raw and unedited. Calvin, Sid Hartman. How you doing, Sid? And Sid says, Calvin, you sound down. I am down. He said, GD arbitration. I mean, he starts just letting out cuss here and there, talking about how arbitration is ruining baseball. Ron Davis doesn't deserve this. Ron Davis doesn't deserve that. And it really clued me into the kind of information and access Sid had. I mean, he these guys opened up to him.
And Rob, I want to let you go here in a second, but I mean, what was your, like, was there ever a moment where he looked at you and kind of gave you, the nod of good journalism, good work, or was he just cantankerous all the way?
My relationship with Sid was always very professional. It was always about results. And what's not admire about a man, the passion he had, and the job that he did. He broke a lot of stories. I mean, nobody even came close. And so, I admired him for his work. I took exception to the way that he would work a room, some of the ways that he would conduct himself. But that was just me. And part of it was that, that was theater that we could all appreciate because we were all working those locker rooms. But, that public never saw that important involved with that. That wasn't who. That's what made him tick. And my goodness, it's the end of a remarkable era. I mean, newspaper, the way that he did what he did for 70 years for the same newspaper, and to break the stories he did and to have the relationships, a tip of the cap. And there'll never be another Sid Hartman. And you don't typically say that about anybody in today's world. But boy, I'm just thinking if 76 years ago he would have had social media at his disposal, my goodness, he would have been known around the universe.
And Gitz, you were talking about Rob Lear kind of being the alpha like Sid. I mean, I love watching all you guys in action because I had to witness each and every one of you getting knocked out of the way and that little microphone going up, or you drop your shoulders because you want to get to Herbeck and you're there for 30 minutes and then Herbeck goes in the shower. You don't have any.
Well, it's funny. Before we let Rob go, I'm going to start a story and Rob can finish it. But once you walked into a room, and Rob, I don't know if Sid ever called you Stanley Hubbard Jr., but every time I would walk into a venue, it would be Stanley Hubbard Jr. How you doing, you jerk? And he really didn't mean it, but he kind of meant it. But you respected him. And Rob, I do remember vividly one night because Rob and I worked at the KSTP, the Twin Cities affiliate, and Rob and I were hockey guys, and Sid wasn't really a hockey guy. Sid was a basketball guy and a football guy and a Gopher guy. But there were some territories, and maybe the North Stars were making a deep run in '91, and we were at Met Center in Bloomington, the old facility, and we had team coverage, and Sid would usually traditionally come flying in late, and maybe hadn't been to. Maybe it might be Game 5 of a playoff, but Sid hadn't been there for one game. And one great memory for me and Rob, I'm going to set the table, and maybe, I don't even know if you remember it, but first of all, it was when Rob would see Sid or Sid would see Rob, the usual exchange would be, if Rob saw Sid, he goes, "What, do you got a map in your back pocket to try to figure out how to get to the Met Center in Bloomington? Nice to see you here." And it would be a return volley of, "Oh, Mr. Hockey, I suppose you're the big shot now. Mr. Hockey, Mr. Hockey." And it would be fun to sit back and just watch Rob and Sid. And Rob, I told Davey, Sid may have took more slashes from us knocking the microphone out of his way, out of our cameraman's way, than any player ever took in the National Hockey League. But there was that kind of back and forth, wasn't there, Robbie?
Oh, absolutely, Eric. And good to see you, by the way. But no, I think one of the hidden agendas is Sid. I think he made better reporters out of everybody in the market, everybody on the screen right now. I mean, he was kind of the bar that everybody was trying to reach. And, we never quite understood how he did it, but he did it time and time again. Would break a story, and again, to think that he was doing it when deadlines would hold, or when the Star Tribune was the first thing in the morning. How those stories, if they would still hold Sid had them, I don't know that would be possible today. But just again, tip of the cap, a remarkable man, an extraordinary career, and thanks, Dave, for letting us share some of our thoughts. What a great career for a good man. There you go. Who's that? Thanks, guys. I'm out.
Dave, I can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
I can't hear Dave either.
And now I can hear her.
Nobody
Hey.
can hear me, right?
There you go.
How's that? Sorry.
Now I can hear you.
Oh, see, I'm here giving a big plug for the mayor, and I think some of the Russians may have hacked my system here, so I got my audio back. But Wally Langfellow joins me, and then I'll say it again. You're running for the mayor of Robbinsdale, so if you want to vote for Wally, anybody in the Minnesota, move over to Robbinsdale real quick and get your votes in. I can say that, right, Wally?
You can. You have to be a resident 10 days ahead of time.
So how much time you got? About a week?
And doesn't Dave,
yeah.
Hey, Wally, good luck on that. Doesn't Dave have to give equal time now to all your opponents, or?
Well, that's probably true. So, Dave, why don't you give him a call? He's a lawyer. It might be an interesting chat.
Hey, well, okay. He's got 2 minutes to call in. Here's the number. All right. So, Wally, we've had a great time tonight talking to Eric and Eric. We had Joe Schmidt, Royce, and you just saw Rob Lear. You and I kind of grew up, at the same time being interns at KSTP and being sent into these things and watching these battles with Sid and his microphone jumping in and blocking. But what are some of your earliest memories, and what are some of your older memories of Sid? Then you and Eric traveled all around the globe watching Sid.
Well, as I'm sure Eric will tell you or has already told you, when we started doing our radio show 20 years ago, we would go and we would track down an athlete in a locker room or wherever, a coach, and we'd be doing an interview. It would be the two of us interviewing a player or coach or whoever. And, we were using this as a segment for our show. Well, Sid doesn't care, as you well know. He would just muscle his way in and stick his microphone in and then start asking questions in the middle of our interview. And he did that, I don't know, for about 4 or 5 years, the first 4 or 5 years we did this. So about 2005 or so. Then there was this kind of movement of the earth. And Sid started respecting us. Now, he nicknamed us. He called us the Bobsey Twins. Oh yeah, and whenever he saw one of us, he'd say to it, he'd say, "Where's the other Bob seat?" And it went on for years, and probably went on until about, I don't know, about 3 years ago, when right after his where he broke his hip, and he occasionally he would still say something, but I'd say probably the last 3 or 4 years we didn't hear much of that. But I would say, and Eric, you could probably confirm this, I would say it's probably been the last 12 or so years, particularly, starting about 2005 or so, where he gained respect, and you had to earn that respect, and you didn't know how you were earning it. The way we learned it was that he didn't butt in on our interviews anymore. He actually would wait for us, and then on top of it, sometimes he would stick his microphone in, but he wouldn't say anything. So he liked what we were doing, but he didn't butt in and take over our interviews. So we gained respect that way. The other piece was our Minnesota Score magazine that we've been producing for the last 18 years now. And in 2008, one of our reporters did a story on Sid and Dave and the Sunday morning sports talk show. And Doug Fratelloni went over and did the story. And I ran into Sid about, I don't know, within a week or two after that, after the story had run. Sid cornered me, and he wanted multiple copies, which I got for him. And then, on top of it all, Sid wanted to be on our mailing list, which was like, okay, now he's starting to soften. And then even after that, Sid would actually compliment or comment on stories that we had in the mag. And so I told people this, I put this out on Facebook, I said, that's the time when I realized that we had made it as a publication, when Sid actually recognized us and and gave us props. So we all have our Sid stories. I just told Eric, we did our radio show today. I told him one. We're sitting I was at the dining room at the Timberwolves game. Probably was about 2 years ago, and Sid plops down next to me, and he starts eating, and he couldn't open the dressing for his salad. So he just, without anything, he just sits there, hands it to me, and says, "Open this." Not, "Hey, have it, just open this." So you open it. But if Sid asks you to do stuff like that, or tell you to do stuff in that case, I think you know that you have a different place in his mind. I think that, like I said, I think he gained respect for it because he saw us all the time. And as Eric and all the rest could tell you, Sid was everywhere. I mean, you go to a practice, Sid was there. You go to a Timberwolves game, Sid was there. Up until the last year or so, he was still going to games, prior to the pandemic. It is remarkable. I mean, that's the stuff that's remarkable to me.
It was just amazing. And as I've watched, the accolades and the tweets from the Twins and the Timberwolves and all the organizations, and you've seen Fran Tarkenton chime in and Carl Eller and all these people, and all of us that were in the business were kind of like, yeah, he doesn't really know him and he doesn't really know him, but you're finding out that he had all these magical relationships that with Steinbrenner and with Muhammad Ali and with all these people. You're like, what was that appeal? What was, and all three of you this will be addressed in no specific order, so Gis, you can start, but what do you think his appeal was to the athletes?
Well, I think we've talked a little bit about it. Initially, I think this was kind of the transition. It was, I'm new here, I'm new to this market. This organization has probably told me about a guy named Sid Hartman, and you want to stay on his good side. And eventually I thought that was maybe obligatory. By the end, if players played here 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, they'll be at his celebration of life whenever that is. I mean, I think no matter what your take is or what your experience with Sid Hartman was, he was a tireless worker. You respected him. Growing up here like I did, he was an icon, and then you're working alongside of him. I'm going to be at this guy's funeral if he doesn't bury me, by the way. I think the people that the appeal to Sid Hartman, Dave, was to know him early might be to hate him, and to know him late might be to love him. And I think we can all say at the end, we love Sid Hartman and we respected Sid Hartman, and he was one of a kind. And it's cliche, but like our colleague Rob Lear said, there'll never be another.
Eric Nelson.
Yeah, well, yeah, Eric G is exactly right. A couple of takeaways for me. He met my my now ex a few years ago, and for about 2 years after that, he says, "How did you get her? You don't deserve her."
He's right.
How does an ugly guy like you get her? And he would ride that horse until it lapped the field at Churchill Downs. I mean, that was one of his go-to staples when he saw me. The other thing is, I told you about the CD I put together for a local guy named Dale Kivamaki. So I listened to boxes of his cassette tapes from back in the day. And one of the takeaways, 87 Final Four in New Orleans, Indiana's playing. It's at the Superdome. Bob Knight is addressing the media. It's a media scrum, as you guys are familiar with the setting for those kind of events. And it somehow came up that Bob Knight had met Ted Williams. And somebody said, "Well, how did you meet Ted Williams?" So I'm listening to this, and Bob Knight says, "Sid Hartman. Sid Hartman introduced me to Ted Williams." And then I had this epiphany of, wow. So he just introduced one of the greatest baseball hitters we've ever seen to one of the greatest college basketball coaches. And it was Sid who was the conduit. He was the bridge. And so there's a lot of those stories out there. And yeah, he said he had a lot of close personal friends. And I think in most cases it was true. I mean, those people knew him and respected him.
Wally, do you think we'll ever see athletes trust journalists and beat writers like they did Sid?
Oh boy, no. I mean, and as you know, Eric, when there was a new coach in town, even in the last, even when Mike Zimmer was hired and when PJ Fleck was hired, I mean, they knew immediately that Sid was going to be center. Sid was going to get an individual interview that nobody else got. And we listened to some of the other writers and broadcasters in town complain. I mean, I won't name any names, but they always complain, say, why does Sid get, Sid ends up with a one-on-one with, whoever the quarterback was of the time, whether it was Brett Favre or whoever it was that was off limits to everybody else. Sid ended up with that one-on-one. Nobody else could have it. And, it's just as soon as they came to town, they knew. Whether it was Favre or Zimmer or whoever it was, they knew. And I'll throw in one other personal thing that none of you guys have. Sid lived 2 blocks from me when growing up in Golden Valley. And my dad would always talk about seeing Sid going into Byerly in Golden Valley. He'd walk in, grab a newspaper, throw his money on the counter, and leave. There could be a line 10 people long. Sid would walk up to the front, throw his money on the counter, out. My dad says he saw it numerous times. That was his Sid story. When I was over at his house the other day, I said, my dad says, "Well, I don't think he hasn't lived there for a while." I said, "No, it's probably been about 20 years since he's been there." And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I'd always see him walk in there, throw his money on the counter, and leave." Hopefully, knowing Sid, he probably shortchanged Byerly's if I have that part right.
Well, I know I saw a lot of heated confrontation. I think the worst, maddest I ever saw was, again, I should have said it when Rob was on, was when Rob scooped pretty much everybody on when Lou Holtz was going to leave the University of Minnesota and go to Notre Dame.
Oh, yeah.
I think that might have been one of Sid's most angriest moments at Rob. But, you did learn to love the man. You have to respect the longevity. You have to respect the athletes that loved him. So I just want to thank you guys for joining me tonight, Eric and Wally. And it's been fun tonight, just kind of reminiscing and just talking about, Sid. There was nobody like him. There'll never be another one like him. And, with the way locker rooms are changing, we're not going to see the dynamics like that anymore because, we all have the same job to do. And through COVID, we're all doing this on laptops anyway. So, hey, any closing thoughts? I'll start with Kiss, since you've been here the longest.
Well, surely we owe the Minnesota sports scene to what it is today. A lot of it is that Sid Hartman. My parting shot is it's funny, the power of a pen or the power of a media personality. As a young kid growing up in Minnesota, and I started the show with this on hunting and fishing trips, guys. If we would catch walleyes, there would normally be a time where we were cleaning them, or if we shot pheasants with our dads, and our dads would have us run and get the Star Trib so that we could put entrails in the newspaper to throw away at the end of the cleaning process, whether it was fish or wild game. And after hearing my dad and his friends argue sports all Saturday and all Sunday, hunting or fishing, they would get a glimpse of the sports page and inevitably start reading Sid again on a Sunday night before they wrapped, fish entrails in this newspaper. So he had that kind of impact. He had that kind of dynamic, and I'm going to miss him, and I think the state will miss him, and I think anybody that ran across him, and it was a pleasure working alongside of him after growing up in Minnesota and having him be kind of an icon of mine. So, Dave, thanks for the opportunity being here, and I'll sit back and listen.
All right, Eric, your closing thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, first and foremost, and I believe Bud Grant said it back in the day, durability trumps ability. A lot of people who could write a column more flowery, more interesting than Sid Hartman. He was not, a novelist. He was an information guy, but you could rely on him, and his durability was remarkable. I mean, you just take a look at the current athletes in town like Byron and Dalvin Cook. I mean, they want to have his kind of durability in their profession. So I think for anybody in the media world, if you can show up every day and bring it, and some days you'll be better than others, but that goes a long way. So he was always there. And, the takeaways I had, from my times at CCO Radio, and sometimes I'd go on a Sunday after him. And this is, again, back when they record shows on cassette tape. Once it was high noon and that sports huddle was over, he would say to the studio coordinator running the board, "Give me the tapes." So whoever you heard on the huddle, Tom Kelly, Lou Holtz, Corey Hunter, whoever, the tape Star Tribune, and he dropped them in the lap of Joel Ripple or the other people who would then transcribe them, and that would be a week's worth of columns. So he worked smarter, sometimes not harder. He had it figured out. If he's doing radio, he was also working for the newspaper, and then he would use it that Sunday night on vision. He hit all formats about as well as anyone has, and he really was remarkable. I will say that.
Well, Dave, I think Eric and Eric have basically said most of what I was thinking as well. But I'll say this, and I'll keep it short. Great respect for him, as like I said earlier, always, anytime I go to a game or a press conference or whatever it was, Sid was always there. Thought it was remarkable, and well into his 90s, he was still at it on a daily basis. But think about this: he started delivering newspapers for the Star Trib in 1928. He has been on the Star Trib's payroll since 1928. Now think about this: this past Monday night, the two games that were played on Monday Night Football were the first two NFL games played while Sid was not alive. That's the first day of NFL football that Sid Hartman was not alive for. Think about that for a minute, and that registers as far as what longevity means. It really is a remarkable run.
Dave, I lost your audio, but thanks for the invite.
Yeah, I lost you too, Dave. I don't know what's going on out in Connecticut. But
that's the last. It's the end of the night Gophers, I think. But I just want to thank you guys and for being a part of it. I miss our friendships. Hopefully we can see each other again at the Super Bowl, or I can get to Minnesota soon. So I'm glad we were able to have this time together, and I appreciate you guys really so much for being a part of Sid's amazing life. I mean, what more can you say about this man who lived 100 years old? That's just awesome. So thank you guys. Don't forget to join me next week. My guest is Drew Bledsoe. That's going to be fun. We'll tease him a little bit about Tom Brady and the time I tackled him and he had to retire. So Don't forget, follow Dave Stevens Speaks on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and all of the wonderful video platforms you can see Dave Stevens on. Thank you, guys. And we'll see you
Thanks, Dave.
next week. Take care, guys. Love ya.
Toodles.